Entre muitas coisas, hoje estou aqui como consultora da ABA, que é uma das organizações também que está a contribuir, a apoiar para este encontro de hoje. Bom, quando falamos é muito difícil começar a falar sobre essa situação das leis restritivas em Angola sem mencionar o facto de que em 2017 Angola teve eleições que significaram o fim de quase 3 décadas de governação do presidente José Eduardo dos Santos, e nessa altura havia uma grande expectativa em relação às liberdades fundamentais no país, né? Porque se perspectivava na altura o fim, acreditávamos que era o fim de uma determinada era para que pudéssemos entrar num processo de maior liberdade, de maiores transformações. E, de facto, observou-se durante um período muito curto um certo aumento de liberdade, né? Por exemplo, a nível da imprensa, as notícias começaram a ser um pouco mais... o jornalismo melhorou, de certa forma, começamos a ver vozes anteriormente entendidas como dissonantes a ocuparem um espaço, principalmente o espaço dos órgãos de comunicação social público, mas entrando a partir de 2019, começou a haver uma repressão maior. Também porque as pessoas se sentiam muito mais livres para reclamar. Várias organizações e grupos de cidadãos, particularmente os jovens, saíram muito às ruas para reclamar sobre vários direitos, e nessa altura houve um aumento da repressão. As forças de segurança começaram a desmobilizar os protestos e com muita agressão. De tal sorte que até no dia 11 de novembro de 2020, um estudante foi morto durante uma manifestação. E foi significativo por ser no período da independência, um pouco depois de se levantarem as esperanças e as expectativas das pessoas, matar um jovem durante um protesto no dia da independência foi um marco. E depois desse evento, não foram permitidos aos jovens fazerem um funeral, cerimônias de homenagem a este jovem, não foi possível. Na sequência da excessiva violência policial, tivemos vários episódios, como, por exemplo, o ataque das pessoas na zona do Cafufo, onde em 2021 vários cidadãos foram mortos. Até agora não houve investigação sobre esse caso, mas pessoas, famílias indicam que vários dos seus parentes, alguns continuam a viver escondidos. Isso aconteceu na Lunda Norte. E na sequência dessa brutalidade, o embrutecimento da polícia, agora começa a surgir legislação para controlar ainda mais as organizações. Né? Começamos primeiro a assistir à nacionalização das empresas de comunicação social. Hoje, por exemplo, nós temos todas as televisões são controladas hoje pelo governo e controlam também a linha editorial. Várias pessoas são censuradas hoje nesses espaços. Em termos de jornais, também houve uma nacionalização nesse sentido, e a legislação também tem sido utilizada como uma forma de controlar e impedir o trabalho das organizações não governamentais. Há uma proposta neste momento denominada Estatuto Orgânico das Organizações Não Governamentais, que, entre os muitos absurdos, propõe que as organizações propõem a criação de um ente para controlar as organizações e validar as licenças que recebem do Ministério da Justiça para operar, e também manda que as organizações solicitem autorização, inclusive para alienar os seus bens, o que interfere grandemente na vida privada das organizações, viola todas as liberdades fundamentais. Para além dessa lei, há a lei nacional, a Lei da Segurança Nacional, que é uma lei que traz uma definição muito ampla sobre o que é segurança, sobre o que é ameaça à segurança nacional, que confere poderes aos órgãos de segurança, para, inclusive, desligar a internet quando achar que há uma ameaça, para revistar as pessoas de forma arbitrária. Então, essas leis associadas a outras, como, por exemplo, leis referentes à comunicação social, por exemplo, aquela proposta que estabelece, que proíbe as pessoas de realizarem estudos de opinião, não é? Que confere ao Ministério poderes, deixa parar, que confere poderes ao Ministério da Comunicação Social para autorizar a divulgação de estudos de opinião. Portanto, é um sistema em que nós estamos, onde a violência está cada vez mais evidente, e se utilizam de ferramentas legais para ainda encurtar ainda mais o espaço que as organizações têm. Mas eu não posso terminar sem dizer que neste momento nós temos uma situação que é muito grave e que tem sido muito negligenciada pela comunidade de defensores de direitos humanos, que é o problema que está a acontecer na zona do Chico, Lunda Norte e Lunda Sul, aonde neste momento mais de 200 pessoas encontram-se detidas e a serem julgadas e condenadas por crimes, inclusive, que o Código Penal da Angola não prevê, como é o crime de hastear bandeira. Não existe crime de hastear bandeira em Angola. E essas pessoas estão presas. Dentro desses grupos existem mulheres jovens com filhos que não têm comunicação, não sabem onde os seus filhos estão. Então, é uma situação muito preocupante que nós estamos a viver em Angola, que é associada também a um certo isolamento com o resto da região e falta também de capacidade em algum nível das organizações da sociedade civil para contrapor estas tendências, esses atos, essas práticas que o governo em Angola
Obrigada, Cisaltina.
Thank you, Nanny. I feel it's a bit unfair when you have so many problems and you're given 5 minutes. I'm Chinomda Shoko. I'm with the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights. I think their issues are similar to the ones that have been raised since morning. And what has been happening in Zimbabwe is a trial by the government to try and limit the operations of civil society and any other member of the country or citizen who has a dissenting voice from what the government has said is right. I'll start with the first one that has been used of late, the Maintenance of Peace and Order Act. Strangely, in terms of that law, civil society organizations, when they have their meetings, they are exempted from notifying the regulatory authority or from getting any permission from the regulatory authority. But we have been seeing that ever since that law was enacted, civil society organizations have had their members arrested for organizing meetings. And the main reason has been the moment they start interrupting those meetings, it means that it doesn't go on and you're also scared of doing other meetings. And just yesterday, there was a meeting that was disrupted, and this was just a community meeting of 6 people that was just giving their quarterly updates, and they were arrested and the meeting was disrupted. A few hours later, they were then released without a charge. And this is being used even in closed door meetings. And the challenge then is there is a lot of surveillance that they even know where members of the CFOs are having these meetings. And the second law that I'll talk about is the Criminal Law Codification and Reform Act. The whole act itself has been used over the years. Crimes including undermining or insulting the office of the president, participating in a gathering to commit acts of bigotry or public violence itself, criminal nuisance, obstructing the course of justice, all those have been used. And even the most severe, we have had CSO members who attended a consultative meeting and a training in the Maldives, and they were charged with attempting to subvert a constitutionally elected government. And recently, the parliament passed into law section 22A, which it's simply willfully damaging the sovereignty and the national interests of Zimbabwe. What this act does is it then prohibits citizens of the country, either who are resident in Zimbabwe or outside Zimbabwe, to have meetings with foreign governments or meetings at any platform where you are discussing issues to do with Zimbabwe that are interpreted as damaging the sovereignty of the country. So that even after having a meeting like this with you, I can be arrested and I can be charged under that particular section. And we have not had anyone who has been charged by that particular section. And we are just hoping that the challenges that we have filed in court will be successful before that is used on any other person. And the biggest animal that we are facing as a country is the PVO amendment bill. As maybe some of you might be aware, the previous bill that was debated through Parliament and passed through Parliament and the Senate was not signed into law by the President. And we are grateful for the efforts that our partners and regional and international partners have done or have put pressure on the government. But now this animal is back and it was reintroduced in Parliament recently. That was March 2024. And now the bill is at the second reading. Consultations were done, but they were literally non-existent because across the country there were only 5 consultations. And I think only 3 were done in the big cities. The rest were done in the most remote areas where people had difficulty in accessing. And for those meetings that were held in the cities, there were disruptions such that nothing was noted. The moment anyone starts speaking against the bill, then people would start singing and there are no consultations. But now we are at a stage where the Parliament is saying we did consultations, they were successful, and we got the views of the people. We are still trying to challenge that particular the fact that the consultations were done. And why are we worried about the PVO bill? We are not scared about regulation. We are okay with regulation. And if it is in terms of FATF, we don't want to stand in the way of any money laundering regulations. But the challenge that we have is the government is then using this particular law to limit the operations of the civil society, giving the registrar all the powers to control the organizations, to stop the registration, to make sure that in the event that they decide to close the organization, the minister has the power to sell all the assets of the organization and to even change the objectives of the particular organizations. And in conclusion, it then affects who we are as a civil society, as an independent voice, when we are told how we're supposed to conduct our business and how we are supposed to do our objectives. And of late, there has been a challenge with the registration of organizations because the registrar even goes to the extent of instructing organizations to change their core objectives. It then affects your freedom of expression, your freedom of association. And we are hoping that this bill does not pass into law, and we are praying and pleading that you help us with the advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Tino. Sheila?
Obrigada. Boa tarde a todos. Eu sou a Sheila Nhankalo, sou de Moçambique. Não sendo diferente dos outros países que foram aqui mencionados, a situação dos defensores de direitos humanos, das associações em Moçambique, não é boa. Só para terem uma noção, no ano de 2021, houve um estudo de um organismo internacional que fez uma avaliação do estado do espaço cívico em Moçambique, e os resultados desse estudo revelam que Moçambique está na segunda pior posição que um estado pode estar, isso significando que os direitos dos ativistas, dos defensores de direitos humanos, das associações, não são realmente considerados, e muitas vezes conseguimos notar vários casos, ou registrar vários casos de ataques contra defensores de direitos humanos, tentativas de difamação em relação ao trabalho dos defensores de direitos humanos. E o principal agente destes ataques contra defensores, contra o trabalho das associações em Moçambique tem sido realmente o próprio Estado, o próprio governo moçambicano. Neste sentido, uma das estratégias que tem sido tendência em Moçambique tem a ver mesmo com as leis que legalizam esta restrição do trabalho de defesa de direitos humanos em Moçambique através dos ativistas, defensores de direitos humanos e associações. Existem algumas, né, com o fundamento de prevenir financiamento ao terrorismo, lavagem de dinheiro, mas vou falar especificamente de uma proposta de lei que foi aprovada pelo Conselho de Ministros em setembro de 2022, que essencialmente, lendo esta proposta, é possível perceber que o principal objetivo é realmente controlar as organizações e, quem sabe, mais tarde extingui-las. Por que eu digo isso? Porque esta proposta de lei dá poderes excessivos ao governo, que podem significar a extinção das associações, no sentido de, se eles avaliarem e notarem que existe algum motivo, que muitas vezes pode ser subjetivo, porque entendemos que os governos africanos têm os defensores de direitos humanos, as associações, como seus principais inimigos. Então, isto viola claramente aquilo que são os princípios constitucionais, porque, primeiro, a entidade que tem poder para decidir sobre a extinção ou não é o governo, não é? E também dando poderes excessivos às entidades que muitas vezes têm sido criticadas pelas associações, pelos defensores de direitos humanos, pode prejudicar aquilo que é a existência das associações em Moçambique. Então, para dizer que, na verdade, a tendência não é muito diferente dos outros países, como foi explicado, quando falam de Angola, quando falam um pouco de Zimbábue, até parece que estão a falar de Moçambique. Então, só para mostrar que é uma tendência africana de utilizar as leis para restringir o nosso trabalho. Obrigada. E queria partilhar também uma experiência em relação a esta proposta. Esta proposta ainda não foi aprovada pelo Parlamento, significa que não está em vigor, mas a sociedade civil, as organizações tiveram um papel muito fundamental em coordenação. Foram iniciados um conjunto de ações que podemos dizer que travaram esta aprovação por parte do Parlamento. As organizações a nível de todo o país se organizaram para protestar em relação a esta proposta. Isso culminou com a auscultação das organizações da sociedade civil por parte do Parlamento sobre isso. Nós mostramos aquilo que são os nossos pensamentos em relação a esta proposta, fizemos estudos específicos, técnicos, científicos, sobre até que ponto esta lei não é constitucional, não é benéfica para o país, não respeita os direitos humanos. Depois disso, também houve uma avaliação que foi feita pelo GAFI, que mostrou que a justificação de que trazer esta lei para prevenir o financiamento ao terrorismo não é muito adequada, até porque as organizações da sociedade civil não são, de facto, um meio de financiamento ao terrorismo e não há muito perigo até ao ponto de se restringir de forma excessiva o trabalho das organizações da sociedade civil. Então, eu penso que um trabalho em conjunto entre as associações para defender interesses da comunidade de defensores de direitos humanos é muito importante e deveria continuar. Neste momento, a lei ainda não foi aprovada e esperamos que não seja aprovada. Também, com base nesta ação da sociedade civil, tivemos várias manifestações dos detentores de mandatos especiais, falo do antigo relator especial para o direito da associação e manifestações pacíficas das Nações Unidas. A Comissão Africana também se manifestou em relação a isso e acreditamos que, de certa forma, esta atitude restringiu o nosso governo ou o nosso parlamento a aprovar de forma precipitada esta proposta de lei. Muito obrigada.
Obrigada, Sheila. Ms. Paulette.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity again. I think for us, we do have really a progressive law in South Africa that recognize civil society, and that also seeks to protect them to function, to fulfill their function in a democratic state. However, what has been emerging is that lack of protection provided, especially with the legislation called the whistleblower. That law, it's a law that encourages people to come out and report crime, like corruption. And it encourages from state institutions up to civil society. However, we've seen how even officials that are privy to information or that should be protected, being subjected to crime and or exposed because of the lack of protection. We are losing a number of officials that are investigating internally in state institutions where there's malpractice, where there's graft. So this is a problem that civil society has been advocating, that we need more protection. The Whistleblower Act is just putting people at risk, and people who are speaking, they find themselves in this kind of hardships and they are risking their lives. And then the other one is the law that, if I may even just give the context, we've seen that some of the laws that you have, as I mentioned, no protection, they have this intention to discriminate. Discrimination is one of the weaknesses of our country. We still have the remnants of that discrimination, of apartheid policy. So now what is happening in this particular case is that women or the community that is living in traditional settings, there is a leadership and a traditional bill or act. So that act, it empowers a chief with the right to preside over disputes of concerning culture and religion. And then in such instances, there's discrimination. The rights of women are not protected. And in that setting, those women do not have the option of approaching the high courts. So we've been advocating for access to justice for women living in rural areas. Because then if the chief that have got biased opinions and they are the custodian of culture, these women, they have got their rights are really limited. The other one that I really we've been working with collectively as a civil society. I think what is happening in our neighboring states, like Zimbabwe, Mozambique, even Eswatini and all that, it looked like, you know, they are sharing amongst each other that this is how I handle such people in my country. It's like they're sharing these bad practices. We've seen South Africa attempting to come up with a law that recommend for mandatory registration, and that to be enforced for international organization, and then also organizations that could be suspect of money laundering, and organizations that could be suspect of terrorism. You know, so those kind of provisions in that act were attacked by, were challenged by a number of civil society. And for us, being at the African Commission, having the guidelines, we educated the citizens, and we submitted our own intervention. So we don't know whether that has been calmed down, if it's on. We still need to see what is the process. The last one, Mary, that I really want to talk about now. I know that we've been following on migrants and refugees and xenophobia, how politicians have been using this as an instrument to mobilize attacks, to blame foreigners in the country for crime, high unemployment, failed service delivery. So what is happening now, because all these cases have gone to the Constitutional Court, and the Minister of Home Affairs is found to be liable, is accountable. All those he lost. He still needs to provide people public participation and process. Now what is happening is that he's been conducting consultation across the country with the intention of encouraging overhauling of all the treaties. The treaty we've ratified at AU for refugee and migrants, the UN. So now we'll see the outcome of that, whether they will finally withdraw from all the regional and international commitment we have towards migrants and refugees, because everybody has spoken, and the politicians have been the one that have been manipulating the situation because they failed. There's corruption. Now they want this to cause confusion and conflict among citizens in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sis Colette. Mama Hannah, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mary, for this opportunity of joining this very eminent panel. Listening to the various speakers, we see the trend continuing, and sometimes it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Perhaps I also need to share the fact that when you go to Cote d'Ivoire, you go to Burkina Faso, to Mali, to Niger, they have laws that protect human rights defenders. Perhaps this is something that we need to share and to push, because in the final analysis, we want states to respect and to ensure that human rights defenders are protected and they feel safe doing their work within the states. So my brief is to look at how civil organizations can use the outputs or the outcomes from the mechanisms. Perhaps we need to begin with what comes out from the offices of the mechanisms. And one would begin with some of these petitions. We also look at press releases. But then for them to come up with these documents, you find out that information has to come from us as civil society organizations. It all comes back to us. We have to know what we send to them, because it is what we send to them that they will be using in whatever documentation, in whatever promotion, or even alerting of states they are going to be sending out. So we have to make sure that we are on top of things. Yes, we are always a step or more before the mechanism itself, and then ensure that they're using what we give them. So once we feed them with the information and they come up with these documents, I think what we need to do is to also ensure that we are part of disseminating these documents. Because documentation, yes, but disseminating what comes from the office of the mechanism is also key. It shows the state that, hey, so I'm not the only one saying it, you know? Listen, the authority on the continent on this particular issue is giving us a shout aloud. So that also is it's an encouragement to those who were able to efficiently get information and share them with the office of the mechanism. Another thing that perhaps we also need to, for me, I always emphasize the fact that since it begins with us, we also need to make sure that we have a strategy. And the strategy sometimes is missing. You want to sensitize people. You have an advocacy campaign, but there is no plan. You know, we are like the fire brigade. This has happened. We all want to get water to make sure that the fire is out. But then when the fire is out, what happens? So even before you anticipate the fire, and you start preparing for your advocacy. Okay, I will be doing A, B, C, D, E, F. And one of the allies that for human rights defenders, sometimes they call them human rights defenders, other times they call them journalists. But I want to believe that they are all part of the family, because as journalists, they are also defenders, because they are sharing the information to ensure that victims or even survivors know how to deal with these issues. So for me, I believe one of the things that we need to put in place is an advocacy strategy. And within that advocacy strategy, you also need to have your media strategy, how to deal with the media, what to push to the media. And also, but before you even push anything to the media, why don't you sit with the media, talk to them, so that you look at the different roles you have and make sure you allocate those roles, so that when there is time to, when it's time, you don't need to start, okay, you do match here, come here. No, everybody would have known their role and everybody would have started, you know. And what is important is that you have a coordinator. It's always, everybody likes to show off, yes. But then when you are doing these things, it needs to be coordinated. Yes, you need to know the mandate of the special rapporteur, which you share. You also need to know who the legal officer is. I'm sure some of you saw a lady at the back this morning. She's the legal officer of the Human Rights Defenders Mechanism. So you need to also know who you can just reach out to. So in the event you are not able to reach out to the mechanism itself, reach out to the legal officer, or reach out to somebody who knows the legal officer and who is part of the network, and quickly get word around. So anything that comes out from the office of the mechanism, I think is something that we need to make sure that it's widely disseminated. Not so, sir, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mama Hannah. While I would like to open up for questions, I was given strict instructions not to overrun our time, because there's another activity that is happening starting at 5 p.m. and it's not happening here, so we'll have to depart and travel quite a bit. But to wrap up the session, I just want to highlight the fact that we all come from countries that have got quite progressive constitutions with regard to fundamental freedoms and human rights. We come from countries that have ratified international instruments from the UN, from the African Union. We are party to this, we are obligated, we are bound. So the question then becomes, why do we have so many problems when the laws are in place? This morning there was a discussion by the Special Rapporteur on rule of law versus rule by law. So I think that's some of the discussions that we need to have, and to come up with the necessary advocacy strategies that Mama Hannah was speaking to with regard to how to surmount that. Colette mentioned the fact that, you know, we in civil society are always looking at these spaces to learn from each other. And we always talk about good practices, right? But Colette has mentioned that our governments learn bad practices from each other. So from those bad practices, they know how to oppress us, they know how to close off the civic space. And so how do we ensure that our good practices bring an end to the bad practices? For many years, many years, we've been talking about shrinking civic space. I don't think it can shrink much more than this. At this point, we are at a level where we're feeling suffocated. So what are the common strategies? The problems are the same, so there must be a common strategy to find solutions to these problems. We are seeing a rise in authoritarianism, and on the flip side, we're also seeing a rise of the risks and the threats to human rights defenders. We are seeing a rise in the attacks on human rights defenders, including killings of human rights defenders. And within this context, we cannot speak about human rights defenders without speaking about women human rights defenders, who face different types of risks. Yes, they do face the same risks that men face, but theirs has a gendered aspect that tends to be overlooked when we are talking about violations. Yesterday, the initiative from which I'm in and Kutakesa held a half-day consultation with women human rights defenders in Angola. And some of the problems were of violations of a sexual nature, which our male counterparts do not suffer from. Some of them are of sexual reproductive nature, which our male counterparts do not suffer from. So these gendered aspects need to be taken care of. We need to look at them as well when we come up with the strategies on how to further protect and safeguard human rights defenders. Mama Hannah is talking about dissemination of information. She's talking about countries where there are laws to protect human rights defenders. But do we know that we actually do have a model law at African level that was adopted by the African Commission, a model law on protection of human rights defenders? This law was put up so that countries could take from that law what would be applicable within their context, and then put it in a contextualized manner that would work in their countries. So this talks about the fact that there are so many positives that are coming out of our mechanisms, but we're not making use of that. And so as I end, I'd like to say thank you to my panelists who accepted. She's also showing me the piece of paper that says stop. Our panelists who accepted to share their country context at last minute. I'd like to thank Kutakesa and the other partners for having this panel discussion, which I think is very critical for us. And I'd also finally like to thank all of you for being patient and sitting with us after a heavy lunch and listening to us. Thank you very much. And have a good afternoon.
Excellent moderation.
Thank you.
Obrigada a todos e a todas por isso. Como sabem, às 17 horas temos a aula conferência. Quem puder estar lá, vai ser interessante interagir com os estudantes. Os mandatos especiais vão dar uma aula conferência aos estudantes de mestrado da Universidade de Lusíada. Acho que pode ser um exercício interessante, porque a maior parte deles só estão na teoria de tudo, como é que é. Então, interagir com os mandatos, fazer perguntas diretas, pode ser um exercício interessante, até o dia que possamos trazê-los para darem aulas, né, periódicas aqui nas universidades de Luanda. Pode ser o início de uma parceria, os nossos doadores estão aqui, se puderem ouvir, seria bom. Muito obrigada de coração e até o próximo encontro. Vamos continuar a trabalhar. A luta continua.
Viva! Viva Angola! Viva!
Ok, caiu o pano assim deste evento realizado pela APESA em parceria com o Mosaico, Instituto para a Cidadania e também o Sindicato dos Jornalistas Angolanos. E assim encerramos aqui esta transmissão e voltar até a próxima oportunidade. Então, até já. São os mesmos minutos finais desta transmissão que levamos até a vocês. Obrigado a todos e a todas que puderam nos acompanhar até aqui e desejar o resto do final do dia e esperar voltar a ver-vos numa outra ocasião. Até já.